Welcome to Catholic Campus Ministries Catholicism 101 series that we've been doing on YouTube and Facebook. Thank you for joining us today. So today we are covering topics of prayer, communion in the saints, and Mary. And so the interesting thing that we're going to actually try to do this week is we're going to try to split it up into 3 separate sections. That way they're smaller bites so that you can listen to them. Maybe you're like, oh, well, I only have time to listen to this one thing. I want to listen to this. So that's going to be our goal for today. So the 3 sections will be on prayer, communion in the saints, and Mary.
Yep.
So those will be the 3 sections. But yeah, so that'll be what we'll do. And
so to start off then, we'll just dive right in. There's going to be a couple of questions that we actually had in, some listener questions, not necessarily in prayer, but I know for when we're going to get to talking about the saints, there's going to be 2 questions that we had some listeners ask that will be answered there. So, keep posted if you're asking some of those questions and they revolved around that. So we're getting to you now. But first we're going to start off with prayer. So for, those who aren't, religious at all, what is prayer? And even for those who are religious, maybe sometimes we forget. It's just something we do. What is prayer?
Yeah. So prayer can be talked about in 2 particular ways. So for the sake of this episode, I came up with my own definition of prayer that makes sense. I wasn't able to find something that I liked as the authoritative definition of prayer, but I did also consult the Catechism, and so I kind of want to talk about that first before I offer my own definition. But Catechism, in its section on prayer, gives the idea of prayer is a gift, prayer is a covenant, and prayer is communion. So prayer is a gift because before we even begin to pray, the fact that we can pray is a gift from God. So it's something that God moves in us. But I think that it's fun too because of the fact that then it flows naturally into covenant and then communion. Is God moves our heart so that we might pray to Him, so that we might be in communion with Him. He wants to be in a perfect relationship with us. But also, just like how in a covenant there are terms, so to speak, so somewhat like a contract, but not, because of the fact that a contract sounds so cold and legalistic. But a covenant really is like a marriage. And so a marriage is like, there are certain rights and responsibilities. Like, I actually have to regularly love my spouse, and if I don't do that, then I'm failing in that covenant. And so prayer is a covenant. A prayer is where I begin to really strengthen and make that relationship really what it ought to be. And then communion, which is the goal of prayer. The goal of prayer is to be perfectly united with God, with having nothing separating me from Him. And so the cool thing about prayer then too is so other definitions of prayer, Saint Therese of Lisieux referred to prayer as a surge of the heart toward heaven. Yeah. So anytime that your heart is just overwhelmed by whether it's beauty or whether it's wonder at how God works, His providence, anything like that, that is a prayer. So prayer doesn't have to be a vocalized word necessarily. But yeah, and the beautiful thing kind of along that same line of communion is God. So Saint Teresa of Avila, another Teresa, she says all the way to heaven is heaven. Yeah. And with that is what He's doing in that covenantal relationship, what He's doing in this gift giving relationship is He's trying to bring heaven to you as quickly as possible, as much as possible. So as much as heaven, as grace, as beauty, as love that you can receive now, God is giving it to you as much as you are open. And so the goal is to be perfectly united where like He doesn't have to wait anymore. God can actually give you everything that He wants to give you. And so then my own definition of prayer is that mode of communicating with a spiritual reality, namely God and the saints. So it is that means through which we talk with, commune with the saints and God.
Yeah. I love that Therese of Lisieux quote because it's been, I think, maybe a month ago that prayer was a big topic of conversation here around the chapel. And that's when I first heard that. And it just made me think every time that I would, walking out of my dorm to class, and, it's a really nice day out, and you see the trees and, how beautiful they are and how beautiful the sun is and the birds singing and, like, just feeling, like, grateful for that. That's a prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Or passing, you're driving past someone and, I don't know, you just have an outpouring of the heart for them.
Mm-hmm.
That is a prayer.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so cool that, you don't have to, it's not necessarily something, I mean, it should be intentional to some
mm-hmm.
degree, but even sometimes it's just in the background of, like, God working back there
mm-hmm.
and making himself known. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, getting into that a little bit then, so I know a lot of people, and particularly in secular society today, have kind of an issue with prayer.
Mm-hmm.
So for those who are questioning, like, is prayer effective? Does it actually reach God? Or is it this just celestial insurance that we're taking out?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Because sometimes people pray out of Pascal's wager. Because what can you lose from it?
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, that's the bare minimum of what you can do. Not saying if that's where you're there that's not a bad thing. But, we should always progress. But, no, all prayer is efficacious. So every prayer that you pray does do what it is supposed to do. But the beautiful thing that a lot of times people forget in prayer, I think, is that prayer is about my relationship with God. Now, God is perfect. He doesn't need anything. So my prayer isn't like stoking his ego or anything like that. It's not like, oh, well, God needs to be loved. No, it's that is the proper disposition of who I am. I am designed to be in relationship with God. That is how I thrive as a person. Prayer is actually our lifeblood. Without it, we die. So without prayer, you will die spiritually. And so the goal is to basically move in that relationship. And so in that way, every time that you do anything in the relationship, it's it is doing what it's designed to do, which is enriching your relationship with God. Not to mention too is one of the fun things that I tell people: you can't pray wrong.
Yeah.
Like no matter how you pray, it can't be wrong. The only way that you could feasibly do prayer wrong, which I don't know how you could do it, is if you're doing something explicitly sinful and trying to assume that that's prayer because sin is moving you away from God, prayer is moving you toward God. So it's like, I don't know, it's like pressing the gas and the brake at the same time on a car. So prayer is efficacious. Prayer can actually affect reality too. I know sometimes people will ask, like, well, let's set up a study to see how effective prayer is. But like, sorry, prayer doesn't work like that. Prayer can't be under a microscope. But the beautiful thing is that God gives us the power to affect reality. Why? I don't know. That's what God decided to do. Is He decided that our prayer could be effective, and that's a really cool thing that He allows us through who He is to affect the world.
I think something interesting too, that kind of relating to this, that I had no idea before I became Catholic, was that in a way prayer is outside of our understanding of time, which is really, really cool when you get into the nitty-gritty of it. But just in a simple way of, it's possible to pray for people who were in the past.
Correct.
And so, like, if you feel, I don't know, you're watching, I don't know, a Holocaust movie or something, and you're feeling, like, very moved for those people, like, your prayer now has an effect on those people then, in their moment of reality.
Yep.
And then praying in the future as well. Like, people will tell you, if you feel like you're called to be married, like, pray for your spouse, even if you don't know them.
Yeah.
It's like, really though, do that.
Yeah.
Because it has a tangible reality that is changing when you do that.
It does. Yeah, actually kind of a cool story with that a little bit. I won't go into all the details, but So I'll freely admit I wasn't as good about praying for my future spouse as was Jamie. But there was one point where Jamie felt really called to start praying for her future spouse. And she was praying for a good, I think it was about a year, for me, and she didn't know that she was praying for me. She actually thought it was some other guy at the time. But nonetheless, she's like, for my future husband, I'm praying this. But the interesting thing is we actually did a comparison timeline-wise of when she was praying that. And that was when I was going through probably one of my worst years. And so the cool thing that, like, even, God knew that Jamie and I would eventually be married. And so God tapped her, so to speak, and said, I need you to pray for your spouse because he needs it now. Even though she had no idea of who I was.
That's so cool. So cool.
So.
And that's a great showing of how, like, it tangibly is working and changing reality.
Mm-hmm.
So cool. Okay, so I think everyone is kind of familiar with this idea of talking to God in a way, and that being their prayer. But, for Catholics and Orthodox Christians, we have this idea of, like, formal and repetitive prayers. And a lot of times these are touted as really bad things. Is it bad to have a repetitive prayer or, like, a formalized prayer? Is that a bad thing?
Yeah, no, it is not. There are kind of a couple of things that we can go off that one. So one is heart prayer is always very beautiful. Anytime that you're sharing with God of how you want to share of, from your heart, whatever, that's good. But just like how in a romantic relationship, nobody ever actually tires of hearing the words "I love you." Like, so God's not going to tire of us hearing the same words again and again from us. But the beautiful thing with sometimes rote prayers or memorized prayers is twofold. So one, there's a really good movie that I enjoy is Finding Forrester, and in it, it's about writers. And there's this seasoned writer and this young and up and coming writer. But anyways, the older one says, "Hey, just write, just type whatever," and the kid just can't think. He can't process anything, and so he sits at the typewriter all day long. And towards the end of the day, the older writer comes to the younger writer, hands him a piece of literature that he himself wrote back in the day, and he goes, "Start writing my work, and when you start feeling your own words, type those." And that's always, I think, one of the best analogies that we can have for why formal prayers or memorized prayers are good sometimes, because it's like, if you don't know what to say, start with these, because these are really good things to write. Just like how this seasoned writer, this guy who is a really great writer, says, start writing these. Why? Because I know that these words are really good. Start with this, and then pray with your own heart, which is why that's a good thing. So sometimes it's good to start with the prayers of the saints and all those people who have gone before us and written prayers, and you can write your own prayer. That's fine too. But then the second aspect of why rote prayers can be good is we as human beings are actually designed for ritual. We enjoy ritual, actually. You love that you can actually predict that what's going to come next. But not to mention, too, is that with ritual, is some prayers, particularly the rosary, and anything like the rosary, is designed to be meditative. And so one of the things that happens in prayer sometimes, just like how in a conversation, you can become distracted. But the nice thing is, if it's rooted, like if you're going through the beads, if you're saying something in your head and you're doing, it kind of focuses your prayer. It gives you a more, the analogy that I gave to John as we were prepping for this is it's kind of like having up the bumpers on bowling. It just nope, guaranteed it's going to get where it needs to go. Why? Because I'm praying the prayers that I know that, like, these are all really good words. And so if I ever lose focus, at least I'm still oriented towards God. And I can attest to that a lot. There are plenty of times in which I pray the rosary where I'm like, I am not thinking about the mysteries at all. And we'll talk about the rosary for sure, but
Yeah, no, I pray it. Sometimes I'll listen to it. Like I'll listen to someone else pray it so that I can like, if it's like if I'm driving or something, and I can't actually have the beads in my hand, and it's fascinating. I never thought about that like it's specifically designed to repetitive prayer is specifically designed to be meditative, pull you back in. And I just thought back to this morning when we were talking about it earlier, of like how I was like kind of drifting off in my thought, and then I was like, oh wait, I know what's going to be coming next. This is the top of the Hail Mary. Okay, Hail Mary. Like pulling myself back into it. It's super cool. Yeah, and I think there's something important to be said about what you said. Like, you know that what you're praying is good. You know that Our Father is good, which I always love bringing up, because, you know, a lot of people like to say, oh, you should only pray from your heart. You know, there's repetitive prayers are bad. Jesus taught us a specific prayer. There's a reason that this prayer marks us out from everyone else, the Our Father. And there's a reason he taught us that, because that's how they prayed.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just really important. So you mentioned the rosaries. So what are rosaries? There are also like chaplets, and then it's mainly an Eastern thing, but like prayer ropes. What is all that?
Yeah. So a lot of all those different kind of things is just all ways in which the church has developed on how to pray. So the rosary is by far the most popular. But the interesting thing is, so a chaplet is any kind of, so to speak, contained prayer, if I remember correctly. It's usually a loop is what makes a chaplet, if I remember my learning correctly. And so a rosary is a type of chaplet, but it's not the only kind of chaplet. The two other chaplets that I know off the top of my head is, I know that there's a Precious Blood chaplet, and then also a Divine Mercy chaplet. But then there are what are called prayer ropes or prayer chains. And so that's basically just a cord that has beads on it, just so that you can keep track of praying. So the beautiful thing about prayer ropes or anything like that is all the physical objects that we have are just simply tools to help us pray. So a physical rosary is designed to help you pray the rosary, so it's set up so that you know what to pray on the various beads. But at the same time, do you have to use a physical rosary when you pray the rosary? Heck no. The funniest thing that I always tell people is God built a rosary into your body because of the fact that you have 10 fingers. So you can keep track on your fingers while you pray the rosary. That's actually how I do it when I run, is I'll pray a rosary while I run, but I do it on my fingers.
I would get so lost so fast. So. You're better at that than I am. And then I think it's cool because you don't, you know, obviously rosaries are intended for a specific purpose, and maybe this is more of a prayer rope thing, but you know, you can pray whatever prayers you want in those orders. Like it's just to keep track and to kind of get you into the mindset of, okay, this is what I'm focusing on right now. This is what this is where my heart is intending. Yeah.
Well, one of the cool things about that too is that, so just so that people know, of kind of sometimes they're always like, okay, well, you pray these prayers of the rosary, but what are you supposed to be thinking about while you pray these prayers? So a rosary is a meditation on the life of Christ and his mother. That's really is the vast majority of the mysteries are actually focused on Christ's life, but there are two that are explicitly like focused in on Mary. But the cool thing about it too, and I didn't learn this until I was working in Cincinnati, but so the rosary is a tool to help you pray and meditate on the life of Christ. And so with that, you can also come up with your own mysteries. Like, that's not unheard of. You can do that. I mean, granted, the church has prescribed ones, but like, if you want to meditate on the woman at the well, meditate on the woman at the well. If you want to meditate on the Beatitudes, do the Beatitudes. You know, whatever, like, so the rosary is simply, again, that kind of focusing, like, okay, if you get lost and you're still praying good prayers. So
So, a final question when it comes to prayer, unless there's anything else you want to cover after this, but are you allowed to pray like rosaries, chaplets, the ropes, whatever, if you're not Catholic? Is that something you're allowed to do?
Yes. You can definitely pray any kind of prayer that you want, and you don't have to be Catholic. However, if you are praying with those things, some people are going to look at you and be like, "Oh, are you Catholic?" But yeah, no. And prayer is accessible to all people. Yeah, no. For a half second, I thought you were going to ask the question of like, should you be doing this stuff during Mass? And my answer was no.
Yeah, no.
Like, you should be focusing on what's going on.
That is a good question, though.
But yeah, is anytime that you're doing any of the sacraments, you should be focused on what's going on in the sacrament.
Because I think you've mentioned this earlier, that like the Mass is the greatest prayer that you can possibly pray.
And the reason why the Mass is the greatest prayer that you can possibly pray is because the Mass particularly is offering to God the greatest gift that you have, which is Jesus. Like, so the altar is one of the things that you always sacrifice. You sacrifice something and offer it on behalf to God. Well, we have altars still, so what are you offering? You're offering Jesus back to God, because you're saying, this is the greatest gift that I have, so I'm going to give you,
And a lot of people forget about that. I think that was something that was really good. It was one of Father Ethan's last homilies that he gave here. And it really struck a chord with me because I'm just now like dipping my toe into like participating at Mass. And he was talking about the idea of like, the Mass is a prayer. And so when you're participating in the Mass, even if you're up here or down there, being seated, what you're doing is prayer. Don't be focused on how you look and what you're doing physically. Focus on where you're putting your energy in. Like, what are you directing this action towards? Right. And that like blew my mind. Because I get so nervous when I lecture. I'm up there and I don't have an actual shaky hand, but I feel like I do. But that helped calm me so much to be able to go up there and be like, okay, this is just a prayer. That's all it is. Super cool. And the only reason I ask about the can you pray these if you're Catholic is that's how I got into learning at the very earliest stages. Was I'm a very physical person, and so these tools help people a lot. And I got a rosary even when I was nowhere near Catholic, just to have something to hold while I pray. Just like, okay, this is a crucifix. I can kind of like meditate on that. Yeah, it's cool. But yeah, was there anything else you wanted to add into prayer?
I think that wraps up our prayer section quite nicely.